This is Everyday Spirituality with Connect.Faith. This is Debbie Bronkema, and I'm here today with Nicholas Zork. Nick is a singer, songwriter, composer, music director, and collaborative artist. His songs resonate and embody meaning and cultivate diverse and inclusive communities, and they help us to overcome social barriers. I love what you said about how you see music and how it interacts with creativity, spirituality, and justice, which is what Connect.Faith is all about. So I'd love if you begin by just telling us a little bit about your journey in coming into being a musician and particularly in spiritual music.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. This is a conversation that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm grateful to be able to have it with folks who are passionate about it as well. So I grew up in a musical family. I don't remember a time in my life when I wasn't making music, but I do remember a time when I started thinking about what I wanted to do with my life vocationally, and I think pretty early on it was clear to me that music would be involved. Of course, my first experiences were very different from what I do now, as is often the case in life. I was in a punk rock band, and some youth pastors said, "Hey, would you guys open up for us at this event?" And we said, "Well, yeah, but we don't have any, we don't have any songs that would be appropriate for a church event." Not that our songs were inappropriate per se, but they were like about skateboarding. So they were like, "Well, write some new ones." So we did, and we had a great time at that event. I have to say, just being given space to play inappropriate blues licks, with a worship ensemble, and just kind of, explore the place where I think there isn't a boundary as much as we create one between having fun, being creative, or making liturgical music. I think we create these boundaries between the secular and the sacred that I'm not sure really exist. Fortunately, mentors in my life early on did not create those barriers. So they let us have a good time. And what I figured out is that I really enjoyed doing music that was liturgical, music that was sort of designed to facilitate an encounter between people and an encounter with the divine, a welcoming, inclusive encounter. I grew to value that, and I also grew to value playing in coffee shops and for anyone who wanted to experience the kind of connection that music can afford. So I think for me, my journey was always it wasn't linear, but it was also kind of complicated and multi-directional in that I was always doing different kinds of music that I saw as being fundamentally related, even though and I had great mentors who affirmed that, even though that wasn't necessarily the case in everyone's eyes.
That's wonderful. It makes me think about, as I listened to your music and you talked about love and loss and how those are themes that are part of regular conversation and themes that are part of spiritual conversation. And I love the way that you kind of interweave that. And it feels to me like you're meeting people where they are. So for you, have you found that people have built community as you began to open up the definition of what creative and spiritual could be? Have you noticed that happening in your life?
I think so. It's an ongoing learning process. A couple things that I've learned are that I think people appreciate seeing one another for who they are and being seen for who they are. And it's surprising to me though still that people embrace and are even enthusiastic about parts of me that I'm not sure belong. For example, in like church spaces, I'm the musician. And when I play in clubs, I'm the guy that got a PhD in theology. They call me Dr. Zork, and they're teasing me, so I basically end up talking about music at church and I end up talking about theology in the club because people are just interested in, people are genuinely interested in who one another are. And I think that music, what we often think of as music is what happens on a stage, what happens in a recording, and that is an essential part of music making. But I really think that as a social practice, it's also the conversations about music. It's the relationships that working together make possible. It's being vulnerable and creating together, learning to have different visions of what you might want to do with a song. I do a lot of co-writing, for example, yet valuing those differences. It's all those things that are like the part of the music-making iceberg that's below the surface. It's all those places where I think community is most, is really truly formed. And yeah, I've found that focusing on and really valuing the relational, collaborative, social part of music making means that you can make the most of what I think is the best part about creativity, which is connecting with other people.
So how do you do co-writing? What does that look like?
Let's see. Well, so it's funny. This is something that people ask me a lot, even other songwriters who don't co-write, and all of us who do co-write sort of all know exactly how it goes. And it's funny because it's particular always to the people in the room, and yet there are some contours that are almost always the same. So it almost always starts with just talking with the other person about their life and your life. I mean. And what's interesting is it's often somebody that I don't know that well, and despite that, I think those of us who collaborate in the arts, we learn to be vulnerable, and it's not always easy. But there was an incredible artist that I got to work with, and literally 10 minutes, or no, not 10 minutes, 3 minutes into our conversation, she talked about her husband's best friend. Dying by suicide. She talked about someone she read about who lost her husband to cancer and what that was like. And we talked for a while, and we decided we wanted to write a song about that tried to be honest about what grieving is actually like and wasn't racing to answers, but was expressing just the fact that we were going to walk with people in the midst of this and not focus on outcomes and I think not credible promises that it's going to be all better tomorrow. And so, we ended up creating out of this. But I think what usually happens is people they talk about what matters to them and what's on their mind. And then you figure out a way to express it. And I will just say that it works if there's a shared goal of creating something that resonates, something that's honest, and that will hopefully resonate with listeners as well. If that's the goal, it really can work. Sometimes you scrap things, but I find that there is often very little ego involved, and I say that as a musician, and all of us, well, I think all human beings, I can speak for me, I have not overcome ego. I mean, there's something, pretty egotistical about thinking that people want to hear what I have to say or sing or whatever. There's always that, but when the more important goal is just creating something beautiful that will connect people, then I've found that collaborators can kind of say, you know what, I'd love if my ideas end up as part of the final song, but what really matters is that the song resonates. So it becomes this experience of connecting with something bigger than yourself, and that's really great when that happens.
You talk about particular and universal in a way that I found really compelling. And that kind of reminds me of that when you're talking about how you're writing, that two people or more people's particular story ends up being something that has sort of a universal feel. And I just wondered, how did you come to that sense that your way of being in the universe was to talk about particular pieces of your story?
First, let me give a shout out to the artist I was mentioning before. Her name's Grace Weber, and anyone listening should go check out Grace Weber. She grew up singing in gospel choirs, and now she's a accomplished R&B singer out in LA. And she is really, I've always found her to be really great at connecting who she is particularly with what she wants to communicate more broadly. And that's why I love working with her. My doctoral mentor said something to me one time that always stuck with me. He said it's easier to particularize the universal. The opposite. It's easier to universalize the particular than to particularize the universal. In other words, if I say something like "love is the answer" or some kind of I've written many cheesy lyrics in my day, and will continue to do so. it's not easy for us as human beings to figure out what love is the answer means in our particular situation. If I tell a story about, who I am as it is revealed in some particular circumstance, and how it was kind of seen as the flawed, broken person that I am, but that, and how someone, a friend or a partner, kind of loved me anyway, or not anyway, loved me for who I am, warts and all. If I tell that particular story, I think people can say, you know what, that's not my exact story, but I can relate to that. I just don't think we don't really relate to, maxims, dogmas, universal statements, summary statements. They can be helpful ways to synthesize what we value, but what we really relate to is a particular story. I've learned so much from other people's particular stories, and I think in music, that's one of the goals is to not just be honest, but be honest in a way that shares my specific view of the world, incomplete as it is. It can be somehow it resonates more fully because it is particular, and I think that's just because it's more detailed. There's more tangible. There's more humanity there. The principles and broad statements, I think, are abstract. They're not flesh and blood and dirt and beauty and all the parts of life that we actually I don't know if we understand, but the parts that we can relate to.
Right. It gives people a way to connect because their experiences connect with each other, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like they may not have had that exact experience, but they've had an experience like it, which is it's somehow tangible,
right.
Sensory. It's experiential,
material, as well as spiritual. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. And that's what the word spiritual is. It can be like we kind of joke around a little bit. Like the word worship, and no one really knows what it means. And spiritual can be a similar word. I'd like to think of spiritual as not being something that's separate from what is tangible or mundane or ordinary or sensory. I like to think of it as that which actually connects all those things. So I think it's about a way to maybe not understand, but somehow apprehend, even if imperfectly, sort of the whole and experience awe. And transcendence, but it's really connecting very particular things, a spiritual experience. It's not something apart from the world. It's sort of where, for at least a moment, the world seems to not make sense, but be connected as part of a loving whole, at least at times.
You're making me think about how people have struggled right now during this pandemic to feel that connection and to be connected. And I know it's particularly hard for musicians. I'm wondering how you are managing this time.
Well, I'm really fortunate. I have a part-time job at a church. Actually, I'm sitting in the building right here. The building has been closed since March, but the church has been open. Because of course a church is a group of people. It's not a building. Right. And I've been fortunate that we've continued to gather online, but it's tough. It's tough. What we've done is prioritize interaction. So we meet on Zoom. We've done crazy things on Zoom that I'm not sure I'd recommend unless you want to get deeply into the weeds of. Well, you seem to have a very tech savvy team. So, we've kind of figured out the ways to combine, high tech, high fidelity broadcast elements with interaction, and that's because we didn't want to. We wanted gathering to be a place where we could see each other, we could see faces and interact. And I've also, been part of musical experiences like that, and that's been great. The challenge is, none of that replicates what it's like to be physically present with people. Music is such a physical thing. When it's not notes on a page. It's not even sound waves in the air. It's something that people do. It's a verb, and one of the most immediate experiences of music is to feel the same vibrations in my body that someone else is feeling in theirs. I mean, it's an incredible experience of connection. It's possible to have that over Zoom, but it's suboptimal. And then just very practically speaking, all music venues have been closed. People can't tour. And these days, streaming royalties are not great for most artists. And most people make their living playing live music,
Right.
And that's been really hard. So I feel very fortunate that we've been able to, pay the bills and get through this time, because a lot of people have been struggling. There have been bright spots, collaborations across the world that might not have happened otherwise. So I think there are things that will outlast, positive things that will outlast this pandemic. I've been writing a song with a great soul singer in Johannesburg, South Africa, and the latency online is shockingly low. So it's I would not have thought that was actually possible. So there will be positive things that will outlast the pandemic. But the fact that we can't get together has been a real challenge, and I hope that things move in the right direction so that can be possible again.
As you think about this community, is there anything else that you wanted to share this morning with Connect.Faith?
Well, you've asked great questions, so I'm not sure that there is. Other than just touch on, I know that at the heart of what Connect.Faith is about is also justice. Mm-hmm. And I think that music can have a profound role to play in making this world a more just place for everyone. One thing that I try to remember for myself, and I guess I would encourage anyone listening to think about, is, we tend to think, when we think about music and ethics, we tend to think about, the themes of the things that we sing about. And that is hugely important. We need inspiration. And we can learn a lot from music. We can challenge others. We can challenge our society. I think there are a couple other things that I've found can be helpful to think about other than just singing about justice thematically. No justice movement has ever succeeded without hope. Coretta Scott King says something about this. Just to reflect on that further, if people don't believe that change is possible, it's very hard to sustain the work that we need to do. And I think that one of the things music can do is it cannot just call out injustice or speak directly to issues of justice. It can also help us remember in a really experiential, bodily way, like what kind of world is possible. I'm not sure we can really fight the battles we need to fight against injustice and exclusion and marginalization unless we also have celebration to remember what it is we're fighting for. So that's one thing. And the other thing is just, we live in a society where, there's a lot of vocal disempowerment. Patrick Evans writes about this. This is his term, vocal disempowerment. And shows like, I have nothing against American Idol and these kind of shows, but they don't do a lot to help people feel empowered, because the sense you get is that if you're not world class, you probably just should not sing.
Right.
And I don't believe that's true. I think the most powerful part of music is not somebody listening to me or even another great singer singing. It's really that's great, but it's also all of us using our voices. And maybe we're not all singers, but there's an incredible power in making music together, in singing together, because the power of music is not that we all understand the theme of the lyrics in the same way. It's actually that we can understand it in a different way, but at the same time. So by making music together, and maybe it is someone singing and someone's listening, but by music making together, we can learn to share time together as a diverse community. We can learn what it means to, we can rehearse what it's like to live in a diverse society where we aren't all the same. And I think unless we can learn to really appreciate diversity, I think it's and empower voices that have been disempowered and marginalized, unless we can learn how to do that and what that's like and develop those aptitudes, it makes the struggle for justice a little bit abstract. So I think in those two ways, just through celebration and through empowering voices, by music making together, I think we can rehearse the kind of world we want to live in and we want to be part of making.
Thank you. You inspired me right there.
Well, I'm glad.
I appreciate it very much. So where can people find you, find out more about you, and hear more of your music?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I have an odd name, so that means I get all the social media handles that I want. My name is Nicholas Zork with an H, and you can find me at Nicholas Zork pretty much everywhere and at nicholaszork.com. Please, I would welcome anyone to reach out. I love to hear from people, just if something resonates with you, I'd love to hear about it. But yeah, you can follow me at those places, and my music streams on all the usual suspects in terms of streaming platforms.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your music and your words. This has been Everyday Spirituality with Connect.Faith.